cause number DC. Sorry, it's not live streaming yet, I don't think.
It shows it is here.
All right. I'm going on the record on cause number DC18-18484. Chalet Mapanta MD versus Gregory A. Echt, MD, PA. Can you guys still see me?
Yes.
Okay. Versus Gregory A. Echt, MD, PA, known NKA, Gregory A. Echt, MD, PLLC, and Gregory A. Echt, MD, individually. Counsel, make your appearances.
Yes, I am Nicola Buff for the plaintiff, Dr. Shelaine Mabanta.
I'm Walt Herring for the defendants, Echt PLLC and Dr. Echt.
As I understand it, we're here on plaintiffs have two different motions, or plaintiff has two different motions to compel. Defendant has a motion for protection. So why don't we go ahead and start with plaintiff's first motion to compel.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on factual background, but it pertains to both motions because there are some facts that are a little complicated but relevant to these motions. This is a fraud case brought by Dr. Mabanta, and she is a radiation oncologist. There's no dispute she was employed by Dr. Echt's practice, which I'll just call the practice today, from July 2013 through January 2019. She has a stay-at-home husband and two girls in their late teens. Both are competitive gymnasts. One's just finishing high school. Dr. Mabanta built up her patient base considerably while at the practice. She generated millions of dollars for the practice. She was well-liked. She had no intention of leaving Texas. But for more than a year, she has been in Minnesota, separated from her family and supporting two households while her girls finish high school and try to hold on to their gymnastics scholarships. Dr. Mabanta was paid by Dr. Echt according to a formula, and that included a revenue share that was premised on revenue generated by the patients that she treated. And part of it was technical, part of it was professional. You'll hear a little bit about those two columns. In the late summer or early fall of 2018, she was presented with an amended employment contract and asked to change how she was being paid so that she would be paid a salary and would no longer be sharing in revenues. And she was told at the time that she could probably expect to make more that way. And so she asked to see some of the documents underlying the way she had been paid. And that's when she started discovering significant errors in how she had been paid. So for instance, there's a medical billing code called with a number of 77470, which she had input into the billing system at the practice for almost every single patient. And it doesn't appear except a very de minimis amount on the documents that she was given. There was another radiation oncologist employed at the same time as her who had never shared in revenue. And we now know that she was getting income for 77470, but it doesn't appear for Dr. Mabanta. There were improper deductions that were taken against Dr. Mabanta's revenue to include malpractice insurance premiums for another doctor. And we can already see that revenue generated from some of her patients was attributed to Dr. Echt and not to Dr. Mabanta. And that was from some very short periods and very limited documents. In some initial conversations before this lawsuit was brought, Ms. Holly Williams, whose affidavits you've seen in this matter, and who ran the billing office out of Las Colinas for the practice, admitted that there were a number of errors, the ones that Dr. Mabanta had caught, admitted that what they owed her was at least another $130,000, but then they never paid her for it. It also became clear that Dr. Echt was merging or selling his practice. And so Texas Oncology Care, as Ms. Williams has said in her affidavit, bought a majority interest in the practice. And That same Holly Williams has submitted affidavits to this court opposing Dr. Mabanta's request for records. And those are the records from which the revenue numbers should have been taken. And so you'll see that the opposition seems to be focused on the explanations of benefits and the remittance advice statements, or RAs. And those are the best evidence, or the underlying documents that tell us what actually did third-party providers pay for the services that Dr. Mabanta rendered, and what codes did they pay under. So we could put on evidence all day long about what Dr. Mabanta entered in ARIA and then what a third-party provider might actually have billed, but to know what was paid and what should have been attributed, we have to see those underlying documents. That's not all that we're here today discussing, but that's where we see the fight has been focused by the other side. Ms. Williams identifies herself as the practice's CFO today, and the practice is a party. What has been requested is that she be paid $300 an hour to produce party discovery. If you annualize that income, that would make her being paid a salary of $624,000 a year, which we don't think is likely. But also we shouldn't be paying for third-party discovery. She admits in her affidavits that she would be producing the records for Texas Oncology that we've asked for, because what we've asked for is, what were you told about the revenue being generated, for instance? And she would be producing the records for the practice, which is a party in this lawsuit. Ms. Williams and the defendant state, we've already given you pages and pages of documents. What they gave us, however, were reports, not the underlying documents. We know from before this lawsuit was filed, we saw 3 different sets of records that Holly Williams had generated, each with different information for the same time period. We don't want to see summary reports generated by Holly Williams. We want to go and look at the underlying documents. And we want to see when there was an audit and due diligence being done by somebody, a large group, Texas Oncology, that wanted to acquire a majority interest, what were the documents that were being given to them and how do they differ? And notably, and I'll move on quickly, Mr. Herring also represents the majority interest owner, Texas Oncology. More importantly than the fact that Dr. Mabanta has fraud claims, there are counterclaims that have been asserted by the practice against Dr. Mabanta, and every single one of them is premised on whether or not she was paid correctly. So for instance, they brought claims of unjust enrichment, breach of contract, money hadn't received, and a declaratory judgment. And their claim is that they actually overpaid Dr. Mabanta, and she should be paying them money back. In addition, there's a true third party, Wise Regional Hospital, and a 3-party agreement that was signed amongst the practice, Dr. Mabanta, and the hospital. And that was so they could have a radiation oncologist in Decatur where she worked. They guaranteed a minimum salary to her as she built up her patient base. And in return, the practice and Dr. Mabanta were jointly and severally liable for whatever the hospital supplemented of that minimum salary. And then there was a burn-off period of, I believe, 10 years. So if she stayed 10 years, it would all go away. The practice is saying that Dr. Mabanta must reimburse them for what they either have paid or still owe Wise Regional Hospital. But it's our contention that Wise paid more than it should have because the pay that was made to Dr. Mabanta was not calculated correctly. In other words, the revenue was understated from her patients. In order for her to defend the counterclaims, we must have the underlying documents. And so they both go to her direct claims and to her defense. There is no dispute that Dr. Mabanta's compensation was derived from amounts actually billed and collected from the patients she served, and that's in Ms. Williams' affidavit. Dr. Mabanta has hired a certified fraud examiner and a medical billing expert, same person, She's mocked in the affidavits for referring to a radiation oncology department, and they say there's no department, we provide services, but they don't challenge her assertion that the best evidence of the revenue that was generated is the EOBs or explanation of benefits or the remittance advices.
So we have two motions. Okay, we have two motions to compel. Let's just deal with those. I know the background. So
Okay.
First motion to compel.
Right. So for the first motion to compel, and let's start with the request for production, the second and third requests, go straight to what those requests are, which are at page 6 of the motion. And I would note, because I think the affidavits are confusing, this practice is all electronic, and it was electronic the entire time that Dr. Mabanta was there. They don't even have paper charts. They scan everything. She entered the billing codes into a system called ARIA, and the information then was sent electronically to a third-party biller. So what we're asking for, and you'll see in the affidavits of both Dr. Mabanta and our expert, it takes seconds to go into a billing system and generate these reports. And this is the information my expert has said she needs in order to give a full opinion, is let's get the reports that show what the third-party payors paid. And then, as I think everybody knows, many times there are initial denials by the third-party payers, or maybe codes entered incorrectly, or not enough codes or whatever. So the reports that we're asking for show that back and forth. So here's what you paid, here's what you challenged, here's what they then paid after you challenged it. I'm told by my expert that 95% of denied claims when they're challenged are then paid, and generally about 5% are for people that actually had no coverage or lost coverage.
Let's look up. I want to make sure what you're asking for. So you're looking at page 5 and 6 of your motion to compel, is that right?
Yes, actually start on page 6.
Okay.
So we start with the explanation of benefits for the
Financial
900 patients, right?
Number 1 says all financial statements provided by the practice and or Dr. Eck to Texas Oncology in connection.
Oh, yes, Your Honor. That's a different motion, but I'm happy to switch to that one. That's to the
Okay.
majority
That's
interest
the only
owner.
one. Okay, that's the only one listed here.
I think when I looked on the court's docket that both of our motions were there, but they might both say motion to compel and link to this hearing.
I think we're both looking at, Holly, the motion subpoena. The court and I are both looking on page 5 of the first motion you filed, which was a subpoena. You filed a motion to protect, and you filed a motion to compel.
Both motions were set for today, and you answered the second one, Walt. So the one that I'd started with was the second and third request for production. Should I email that over somewhere?
What day did you file that?
I think it was the 14th of April. Let's see.
Okay, I see one on the 13th. Let me see if this is it.
Sorry, I'm going down to check our certificate of service. April 13th.
I see it. Okay, I found it. It's not. Do you both agree that this is set for today?
Yes, this one was set for today. The first one was actually set last week, and we continued it to this week.
Okay, maybe that's the confusion. All right. So the first thing is request for production number 1. Sorry, the second request for production number 1. It's produce all EOBs for services rendered to patients treated by the practice during the period. Okay. So what is your response to that? Why do you not want to produce that?
Well, I need to take just a brief moment. I will be brief, Your Honor, I promise. We obviously have a whole different view of the facts than what the plaintiff has just presented. In fact, I think that presentation was skewed very much, but understandably, I understand why. the issue here is from a lot of this, is Dr. Mabanta was hired as a radiation oncologist in one clinic. There are 8 clinics in this practice, 5 different locations. She
He was
does,
hired in Decatur, right?
and this is in Decatur. The other ones are in Las Colinas. There's one in Denton. I think there's one in Grapevine. So there are ways. So she does external beam radiation oncology, one type. The practice has a number of physicians who practice at the practice in a number of locations that do a number of different procedures. They do seed implants, they do chemotherapy, they do dosimetry.
But what if we limited request for production number 1 to just EOBs for services rendered to her patients as opposed to all patients?
Okay.
One thing we would propose is that it be the 2 clinics where radiation oncology is provided, because there were radiation oncologists that were paid differently, and we already know that they were billed correctly while Dr. Mabanta's were not. And so for the EOBs, I agree, but for Decatur and Las Colinas, those are both RadOnc locations.
All right.
Well, that was my first one point I was going to make, is that it's very limited what her contract, what her pay, what her, that's related to these issues as opposed to the practice, which is huge or big. The second issue deals with what we have provided to begin with. And I know that they are alleging that these are somehow unreliable documents, but let me explain what we've done. When the lawsuit was filed, we believe that we don't want the attorney's fees to get out of control here. This is not that large of a dispute. We provided the plaintiffs with a summary of the reconciliation. And as Holly said, Holly Williams will agree that there were mistakes made both ways. They're not huge mistakes. They're over a 5-year period. There's some mistakes going either way. But what happened here is we submitted a reconciliation and gave them at that time, and we've produced in this case as well, the documents that, and the way billing works is the providers write down what they do, and they enter into a system called ARIA at the clinics, what they did and the codes they did. We print that from ARIA in PDF form and send it to a third-party biller. We have her declaration. That's Barbara Walsh. She's up in Rochester, New York. We do that every week. Every clinic, the practice sends all of their bills that are entered into ARIA. They're not changed from ARIA. They're just PDF forms sent up to her. We have produced all of those PDF forms of what was submitted to the biller to the plaintiff. The next thing they have done is then the biller in Rochester, New York, goes through and takes the codes and submits the bills to the individual payers, Medicaid, Medicare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, whoever it is. They're the person who sends out those bills, and they do it every week. Then what happens is when the bills are paid, we get what's called an and we have provided all of that to the plaintiff. All what was sent to the payers, we have provided. So we provided what's put in an ARIA, printed them out, what we send to the biller, which is what from our system. The biller then sends that to the payers. The payers then pay, and when the pay comes in, it comes in from a payer all at once. Like Blue Cross Blue Shield will submit their week's payment to the practice. On that EOB, the explanation of benefits, are all the patients of the practice. That's the EOB. What we have given the plaintiffs instead of the EOB is what the payers paid us. That's also from the
Okay, all right. So
systems.
I'm going to order for request for production number 1, all EOBs related to radiology oncologists at Decatur. And
it needs to be external beam, Your Honor, because there's an internal beam and an external beam. and they're two different things.
They're
And-
both going to be required to be produced.
I'm sorry?
They're both going to be required to be produced. All right, so let's go to the third.
Sorry, Your
request for
Honor,
production.
I'm so sorry. Was that for Decatur and Las Colinas?
Decatur and Las Colinas.
I know I'll be drafting the order.
Third request for production, number 1, and you should be able to see it on screen now. Are you guys able to see this?
Yes, Your Honor.
So request for production number 1. So how is this different than EOBs, all reports of reimbursement? Have you not received those already?
No, we haven't. So these are reports that are generated in practice management software, again, very quickly. So it will be, let me segue just for a minute, under the High Tech Records Act of 2009, the practice is required to keep these electronic records. And so we know they're there. And then you generate these reports so that we know what the practice says internally, it's actually received and under what codes. With Dr. Mabanta's help, she can look at the patients and say, for instance, here's the planning code we use for every patient. It's not here. Or here's the external beam or seed, there's some kind of seed process. That's not here. So that's why we've asked for it several different ways, which is show us by code and then show us what the income was. So
Okay.
these I received
Your
from
Honor,
the,
we believe we have produced that. And again, here they're asking for each provider, that's all the physicians in the practice or the provider.
Right, we'll limit this to just the radiology oncologists.
The beam radiologist oncologist.
Beam Rabia, the ones at Decatur and Las Colinas.
okay. Now, with one caveat, which is this, we already know that for one of the codes that Dr. Mabanta was regularly using, Dr. Echt was getting credit for some of the patients. I don't know that he is a radiation oncologist, but we would need to see what we believe has happened is there was, for patients who started with him and then went to Dr. Mabanta, they kept all the income under him, and that's going to be a sizable amount. So if he's not a beam radiation oncologist, this won't include him.
I have to respond, Your Honor. That's simply not true. If a patient came to the Las Colinas clinic and saw Dr. Echt, because he's a fairly well-known cancer person, if they saw Dr. Echt, he would be able to build an initial visit code. Then if the patient was in Decatur or closer to Decatur, he referred that patient to the Decatur clinic. That patient is put in the system for the Decatur clinic. So even if Dr. Echt billed the initial view, because Dr. Mabanta couldn't bill an initial visit because she wasn't the initial visit, it would go to the Decatur clinic's bottom line. So there's no stealing of revenue. And that's perfectly legitimate to do. Dr. Mabanta couldn't even bill an initial visit.
I want to make sure
We're
I'm
not talking
understanding
about
this correct. I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Dr. Mabanta was the only doctor in Decatur, correct?
Correct.
So any of the things that we're ordering here, that we've ordered so far at least, and unless otherwise stated, all records out of Decatur are going to be ordered to be produced, whether it's for Dr. Mabanta or Dr. Echt or whoever, but anything out of Decatur is going to be produced. Number 2, request for production number 2, and we are kind of running out of time. So any objection to 2 with the limitations we've discussed?
Again, if it's just for the Decatur clinic, I think we've done that. So we're okay with that. Yes.
Decatur and Las Colinas.
Well, okay, Decatur and Las Colinas. I don't know how burdensome that is, Your Honor, but I will let the client know that that's the order.
3, what about 3?
And this is for we're just talking, again, Las Colinas does a number of other kind of treatments. We're just talking about.
Just for beam radiology
Okay.
in Las Colinas. All of Decatur's records in beam radiology in Las Colinas. Number 3. Let me just ask you this: any of the rest, 3 through 9, or 3 through 11?
I think they're
You
all
would object.
same
I'm sorry, just let me finish. For 3 through 9, do you have any objection to producing these documents for Decatur and Las Colinas? And Las Colinas just the beam radiology.
Number 8 is the contracts for all the commercial payers. I really don't know why they need to see our reimbursement rates. So.
Because that's how the revenue is generated, is the rate that the practice actually received.
Yeah, but the of course that's we get. Of course, that is how Dr. Mabanta is paid, but the contract is the contract. She's not going to be paid anymore unless the argument is that we were somehow agreeing that we would take less than the contract provided, which would hurt us more than Dr. Mabanta. It seems a little ridiculous. We collected what we collected under the contracts. We would want to collect as much as we can too.
The reason this came up was our experts said that some of the rates on the little bit of information we do have were below market. And so she said, really, we ought to be looking at the contracts to see what's going on.
But that's a different claim. That's a totally different claim if whether or not we negotiate a good contract or not isn't Dr. Mabanta's claim. She's not even an owner of the practice. She's an employee. So you're going to.
I would say, Your Honor, we'll suspend that for now, because if these reports are the reports generated from the practice software, we probably don't have to back into it by looking at the contracts. If we get these reports and there's an issue there, I'll come back, but let's take that off the table.
All right, so 8 is taken off the table. How about 10 and 11?
Well, 9 is the EOBs, and that's the biggest issue for us. We're not focusing on the EOBs. This is what the plaintiff is focusing on. The EOBs aren't going to show them any more than what will be provided by others.
I've already ruled on this, and you're gonna be required to produce all of the EOBs for Decatur and for the radiologist at Las Colinas. So let's look at 10 and 11.
Okay, 10 is the compliance plan. It's very similar to the contract issue. The compliance plan is the Patient Protection Act required you to come up with a compliance plan to ensure that.
Ms. LaBeouf, do you even need this? I don't think this is, if you're not needing the contracts, I don't know why you would need this.
Let's take this off for now too, because I think with the other reports will be okay, but that's an expert question. So if I can remove that for now, and it may be that there's plenty from those reports, we don't have, again, to back into it. I think some of this was, if we don't get the reports, we're going to have to recreate the wheel. So we'll
request for production, and then request production number 11, unbilled claims. Is that for people who don't have insurance or something?
Yes, we know there was a lockbox and cash payments made, and also there are deductibles, which can be sizable now. So that is important. That can be a significant source of revenue.
Those are billed claims. She was paid on collection. So even if it went into the lockbox, it would be a collected amount. What's billed? And again, it hurts us not to bill the claims. So unbilled claims is a detriment to the practice. They billed all the claims. What's important for the breach of contract and or your allegations that what we collected was somehow improper or didn't.
And that's what this is looking for, is the reports that show us that, because the other reports have to do with insurance payers and Medicaid and Medicare. So I'm told by the expert and by Dr. Mabanta, you go into the practice management system, it's a simple report. I don't know what it's called. It doesn't have to be every way you can do the report, but we need to see what that income is.
Okay.
But
so
it's not
say-
income. It's
so-
not income. It's unbilled.
No, we're
I think-
talking about unbilled to third-party providers. It's the cash that you just said comes in. So we know it comes in. So how do we get that?
No, that's not what the request says, though. It doesn't say, it doesn't say all documents and reports of evidencing unbilled claims to providers or to payers.
Well, that's what it was intended to
Collected.
do. If I need to send another request for production so we can get the cash report.
I think it's clear enough. I said all documents, reports, evidence, so anything regarding the cash payments we've discussed, anything like that, deductibles, all documents involving those for Decatur and then the beam radiologist over at Las Colinas.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
All
All
right,
right.
so that finishes this one, and we are almost out of time. So let's get to the other one real quick.
Okay, so I'll be very brief. Texas Oncology is the majority owner of the practice, same Holly Williams, same attorney. What we want to know is during that due diligence period, how does it compare between what was told to Dr. Mabanta about income versus what was told to this potential buyer? But we also asked for recorded statements by Dr. Mabanta, any communications with Dr. Mabanta, and any audit reports prepared in connection with the sale, and any representations made about Dr. Mabanta's income and what she generates for the practice, and anything regarding her. So we think that the representations that are made, we know she's a profit center and generating millions of dollars. What was being told to a third party during the same time period when Dr. Mabanta is discovering the errors?
Response?
Yeah.
Again, the practice is 8 different practices and 5 different clinics. Dr. Mabanta represented 5% of the patient base. There's 15 to 16,000 patients seeing during this time. The revenue generated by all the other practices are irrelevant to her claims. And to produce this is going to be, and we truly trying to be reasonable. We said, we'll just show you all the documents if you want to see them, plaintiff. But because these are sensitive, because they are, an employee asking for all the employer's documents, essentially, and it has the contracts for other physicians, it has the payment rates, it has for other things, it has personal information, not only just for the employees, but personal information for other patients that she had nothing to do with. We'll provide that to you, but we just don't want Dr. Mabanta to be the person who goes through it. We offer, we'll give it to you for attorney's eyes only, and your expert can come look at it, and that's appropriate. But if we want to do that, it is going to take us some time. We think it's totally irrelevant. But if you really want to take the time to do that, we'll give it all to you, but it's going to take time for us to put it together. And we think you should reimburse our people for doing that, because we're running a business. We're not running a lawsuit business. We're running a cancer treatment facility. Employees do other things. That's what they're paid to do. They're not paid to do this. And so Miss Williams, if she's going to have to take time off her many other duties to put this together, she ought to be reimbursed for it, because she's lost through the practice.
I think the question would be what shows the representations that were made about the income generated by the radiation oncologists, and if they have it, that specifically generated by Dr. Mabanta.
And why is that relevant to her breach of contract claim?
It's relevant to her fraud.
Third party. Again, why is that relevant? why is that relevant to her claim?
I think that they're directly relevant because, like all discovery, it's to test the truth of the representations that are being made. And we should see what was being said to Dr. Mabanta about what revenue she generated, while third parties are being told what revenue she generated.
But
I
the
don't need
third
to
party
see-
may have a claim. The third party may claim that we misrepresented her, but what is Dr. Mabanta? She's getting all the documents that show her what her revenue was, what her collections were. She's getting all that. That's her claim. What we represented to some other third party, Texas Oncology, they're not complaining about it.
It illustrates the untruthfulness of the representations to Dr. Mabanta in that exact period.
I tend to agree with Mr. Herring on this one. I don't know why that would be relevant at this point. So is there any of these, there's audit reports. Was there an audit report done specifically as the Decatur or?
No, not that I'm aware of. I will ask, Your Honor, but I'm unaware of a specific audit report for Decatur.
So let's look at documented communications with Dr. Mabanta. And all recorded statements by Dr. Mabanta. What would that be?
8 and 9. Is that what you're looking at, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Yes.
I honestly don't think there are any communications between Texas Oncology and Dr. Mabanta during this period of time. And I know there aren't any statements from Dr. Mabanta in the file, the closing, the due diligence files.
My proposal, given the court's inclination, is that we get documents requested by number 3, by number 6, but limited to Dr. Mabanta, by number 8, and by number 9. And either they exist or they don't, but
That's fine. That's
Okay.
fine. So 3, 6, 8, and 9 limited to Mabanta is fine.
thank you.
Then the rest are the objection sustained. All right, guys. Anything else?
I don't think so today.
Ms.
I
LaBeouf,
can-
go ahead and prepare an order with all of this. I've kind of handwritten out my notes, but prepare an order, submit it to Mr. Herring, and then email that to my court coordinator as well as e-filing that as soon as possible. Okay.
Yes, sir. I sure will. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
You guys
you,
have a
Your
safe
Honor.
week. Okay. I'm ending
Okay.
the live stream here.
Okay.
Stay healthy.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye.